The road to the Lake View Chalet in Alberta has never been so tense. Normally, it's a quiet mountain route. Tourists stop to take photos of pine trees, breathe in the crisp air, and enjoy the Rockies. But this time, the road was lined with protesters. Their banners flapped in the wind, helicopters circled overhead, and police kept a close watch as world leaders drove past in black SUVs. Inside those convoys were the most powerful figures of the G7, including United States President Donald Trump and Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. But instead of smiling for cameras and talking about cooperation, this year's summit had turned into a showdown. Trump had just doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%, a move that shocked Canada and sent ripples through the global economy. Factories were halting production. Trucks were idling at logistics hubs. Auto stocks were plunging on Wall Street. While Carney faced Trump at the summit, the streets of Canada were already speaking loudly, even without shouting. In Ottawa, the granite steps of the United States Embassy, usually a backdrop for tourist photos, had turned into an open-air assembly. Protesters stood in silence, holding banners that read, "Yes to trade, no to threats, and allies don't bow to bullies." What made these protests powerful was their quiet determination. There were no smashed windows or riots, just ordinary Canadians, teachers, students, factory workers, even retirees, standing shoulder to shoulder. The message was clear: Canada would not accept being strong-armed. These demonstrations spread across the country like a wave, from Halifax Harbor on the Atlantic to Vancouver's Granville Street on the Pacific. Even Windsor, across the river from Detroit, saw marches. A leaked note from the United States Embassy admitted that Washington was alarmed, not because Canada was angry at China or Europe, but because the anger was directed at America itself. This public pressure gave Carney the political backing he needed. He couldn't walk into that summit ready to compromise, not with the nation watching. And as the protests grew, so did the tension inside the Mountain Lodge. Inside the Mountain Lodge, the atmosphere was anything but diplomatic. The usual G7 choreography, friendly handshakes, smiles for the cameras, and carefully worded joint statements had been shattered. Trump opened the private session with a surprise. He suggested inviting Russia back into the G7, claiming, "If Putin were here, the Ukraine issue wouldn't have become a disaster." The room went silent. Germany's chancellor looked away. Carney quietly closed his notebook. Then the conversation shifted to the heart of the crisis: steel and autos. Trump warned that Canadian car exports can't come for free anymore and added, "A 50% tax is just a teaser." The message was clear. Even harsher tariffs were on the table. Carney didn't flinch. He delivered his now famous response: "The supply chain is a single lane. If you build a barrier, both lanes will be closed." His words landed like a cold wind through the room. Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen exchanged nods. For the first time, it looked like the other G7 leaders were forming a united front against Washington's unilateral moves. Meanwhile, analysts outside the summit were already crunching numbers. Investment banks warned that if tariffs stayed in place, North American auto production could shrink by 10% within 2 quarters. This wasn't just political theater anymore. It was a ticking economic time bomb. The effects of the standoff began rippling through the economy almost immediately. A white goods manufacturer in Chicago that relied on Canadian sheet metal shut its doors for 2 weeks, sending hundreds of workers home. A smelting plant manager in Quebec went on local radio to say that 500 employees were anxiously watching every word exchanged between Washington and Ottawa, because those words could decide whether they'd still have jobs next month. Markets reacted too. Automotive and construction stocks opened in the red on Wall Street. The Canadian dollar slipped as investors feared more disruption ahead. Even the United States delegation seemed to sense the pressure. They cut their summit dinner short, returned to their lodge early, and quietly moved up their departure time. Carney, meanwhile, refused to blink. He finalized a tough statement that promised World Trade Organization action, export credit insurance for Canadian producers, and, most importantly, a 60-day warning. If the United States didn't roll back the tariffs, Canada would hit back with its own equivalent customs measures and start diversifying its supply chains away from America. At the same time, Canada began quiet phone diplomacy with the European Union and Japan, laying the groundwork for a critical minerals alliance. These resources, lithium, nickel, graphite, are the lifeblood of the electric vehicle and battery industries. Trump's advisors privately called this a hostile cartel, but markets saw it as a rational move to protect Canada's future. By the time the summit ended, it was clear that something bigger than tariffs had been set in motion. The joint G7 statement, normally a routine formality, never materialized. The signatures were missing, and the leaders left Alberta with the sense that the old order of cooperation had cracked. Back in Washington, the White House press secretary told reporters, "The president is flexible, but our interests are not negotiable." In Ottawa, Carney stood before cameras and said, "Canada extends a hand of friendship, but it does not applaud those who twist an arm." These two sentences summed up the new reality. Neither side was willing to back down. The economic fallout continued. The Toronto Stock Exchange lowered its profit forecast for mining companies. Protests didn't turn violent, but they didn't stop either. Banners reading "Negotiation is a right, not a threat" stayed on apartment balconies long after the summit ended. A young software engineer told a reporter, "We've gone from talking about apps to talking about steel. The supply chain is like dominoes. When one falls, the rest follow. And this standoff is far from over." Next month, the joint financing of a massive LNG terminal in New Brunswick is set to be debated. Washington wants to sell gas. Ottawa wants to be a bridge to Europe. But unless the tariffs are lifted, Canada's parliament is unlikely to approve the deal. This is no longer just a tariff dispute. It's a test of whether two neighbors can rebuild trust or slide into a long-term economic Cold War. The mountain road in Alberta, once just a scenic route, is now a symbol of how fragile the global economy has become. So what do you think? Will Canada and the United States find a deal that saves the supply chain? Or is this the beginning of a deeper trade divide? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this story is still unfolding and the next chapter could change North America's future.